The letter told me
Yeah.
All right.
what the subject was.
Right.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. It's 4 o'clock. My name is Mickey Airy. I'm the city administrator. And today what we're doing is an information meeting about what's called Chapter 353. So the city attorney is Lauber Municipal Law. That's our general city attorney. And then we've also got out of Lauber Municipal Law, we've got a special counsel for economic development. So we've got online, Nate is actually one of our city attorneys that does general work for us. And then Lindsay Kolish is our economic development attorney for the city. Lindsay's going to walk us through about a 20-30 minute presentation overview of Chapter 353. If you have questions, just go ahead and ask the question at the time. So she's going to walk you through these slides. This is all the beginning of a process for what we're hoping to do revitalization of downtown Monette. So this is one program. It's not been approved by City Council yet. We're just doing an information process to see if there's even an interest in what this program could do for property owners that are in this designated area that we have here. So I'm gonna, without anything else, Lindsay, if you'll take it away.
Sure. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
And see the presentation slides, not necessarily my face.
Yes.
Okay, good, perfect. So like Mickey said, I am Lindsay Kolish. It's nice to be here with you guys this afternoon. We do serve the city as Special Economic Development Council. You might be familiar with our firm. We have offices in Springfield, Jeff City, and Lee Summit. And we provide economic development services to cities across the state, but we represent cities. We don't represent developers. You'll never see us on, advocating for a developer. We represent cities. So we're here today to talk about Chapter 353 incentives. Is anybody familiar with 353? No? Okay, perfect. That's what we're here for, right? To talk about it. So the first thing to know about Chapter 353 incentives is that this is really an older incentive model. It was started in World War II, or just after World War II, to sort of address the housing shortage after soldiers came back from the war. So it's unfortunately been a little bit ignored by the legislature over the years since TIFs and SIDS and other sort of economic development tools have been established. 353 has fallen to the wayside a little bit. So sometimes the statutes read a little funkily because the language is about 80 years old. So that's something just to be aware of and to know that sometimes maybe different counties interpret it a little bit different or work on it differently. But just that the incentive together is just a little bit old. So we continue to work on it. I really like 353 incentives. I think they are a really good program for the city for 2 reasons. One is that usually with economic development projects, we have developers coming to the city with a project they've already planned and designed, right? They want a restaurant and they want a sports facility, and that's what they're doing. We don't really get much say in that. Here, the way that we will describe this program, the city can initiate it and the city can say what sort of redevelopment it wants to see and what it wants to come into an area. And I think that's really exciting for the city to be able to target the redevelopment that way. The other reason that I really like 353s is because once it's up and running, it's really available for property owners. It's a low barrier to entry. You might be more familiar with TIFs and SIDS that have a lot of statutory notice periods, or there's a lot of negotiation and work on those agreements. But for this, once we have this up and running, property owners are able to just apply and then start working on their project. So that's what I really like too, is just that it gives property owners a lot more flexibility in being able to sort of take that initiative to work on their project. So, did you guys get the next slide? It's working. Oh, I see it.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So for starters, just a quick summary of how this program would work. First, the city establishes parameters for the abatement and for the types of projects that it would want to receive. It sets up those in conjunction with the community, but it sets those parameters. And then once those parameters are set, the property owner just has to apply, make their improvement, and then they would receive tax abatement. So like I said just a minute ago, there's a much shorter time period for the actual property owners involved. Two important things to know with this program is that one, there are no new taxes. It is property tax abatement of all taxes in the area. So it would be property taxes for the county, for the library, all of those would be included. And then second, the abatement is not automatic. The city is proposing that the historic downtown is the area that we use for this program. And while all of the properties in that specific area would be eligible for abatement, they will not receive abatement unless a property owner applies, makes the improvements, and follows the redevelopment plan. So any questions there just on the very basics? We'll dive into everything a little bit more. Okay. So like I said earlier, it kind of sometimes depends on county by county, and also this really depends on how the city wants to move forward. So this is the general model of how the city initiated 353s would start. So first, the city would approve a redevelopment plan, and that redevelopment plan is really the major governing document of this plan. It outlines the goals of the program, what kind of redevelopment the city wants to see, what kind of abatement is offered. We'll talk about it in a minute, but there are different levels of abatement sometimes that we can offer. So those are included in there. And then any other special considerations, anything that the city says, this is what we want to focus on, those all go into the redevelopment plan. Next, after that redevelopment plan is approved, next, the city would appoint a board of directors who would actually administer the program. They would be the ones who are actually meeting and going over applications to review, and then they may also come up with their own guidelines. But these board of directors are a separate entity from the city. They are their own urban redevelopment corporation that is still registered with the Secretary of State and has requirements there. But those board of director members are typically people who are involved in the community. We usually see a representative from the city, a representative from the school district, and then a lot of times people from, the local groups, Main Street, Rotary Club, those sorts of groups are the people who are usually involved in that. And then after the board of directors has begun to meet, people can apply. They just tell the board of directors what kind of project they want to do. And as long as it complies with the redevelopment plan, that project generally would be approved. And then those project improvements are made. The timeline here is very flexible generally for the project improvements. I represent another 353, and we have some projects that are 6 months in length, some that are full renovations of historic buildings and are projected to take 2 years. So it really just depends on each project. There's a lot of flexibility here. And then after those project improvements are made, then that tax abatement would actually be given to that property owner. Are there any questions on sort of the process? We'll talk more about the abatement next.
I do. What level of proposal does somebody have to have? I mean, do you have to have, architect's approval or plan, or can you just kind of, write it up yourself the best you're able? What?
Well, it is generally designed to be very accessible for property owners. So while some projects may need like a structural review to make sure that there are, that the building will remain standing during your project, generally we don't need engineering stamps or anything like that. You will still have to follow all of city code. So if you would need some sort of engineer's stamp for anything on city code, you would still have to follow all of those requirements. But generally, it's I want to renovate this building and I'm going to put in, drywall throughout and put in a bathroom and put in new flooring. And that's really all we need. It's dependent on what the board of directors wants to see, but it's not an extremely high level of engineering drawings or schematics or anything like that. So the abatement.
Yeah, Lindsay, you got a question?
If you have property in that area and you choose not to participate, are there going to be any repercussions?
No, I can answer that, no.
It's just asking people to participate. So you don't have to participate, and you will not get tax abatement if you don't participate. But if you do want to participate and improve that property, then you would get tax abatement.
Oh, let me jump in again one more time. I think I probably know the answer to this, but I'll ask it just the same. The tax abatement applies only to the property that is being renovated, right? In other
Correct.
words, okay. So
it's by parcel. So if you had, two different parcels and you were the owner of both parcels, you would have to apply under both parcels. But if you just
Right.
have one, it's just that abatement on that parcel.
right, but if you own a building in the designated area for the blighted area and another property, say for instance, out on 60 highway, you can't get an abatement of the taxes for 60, right?
Correct. It's only within the specific boundaries. And we'll talk about that in just a minute too.
Okay.
So the actual tax abatement, the way that this is set up is that for the first 10 years, the property would receive 100% tax abatement the improvements on the property, and that includes it's the structures essentially. If you have a house and through this program you build a garage, both the house and the garage would be 100% abated. And that's just on the improvements. And then for the land value, the increase in the value of the land will be abated. But that base value before you receive tax abatement will continue to flow to taxing jurisdictions. Does that make sense? Your property tax bills should have the breakdown, and if not, we'll work with the county assessor and make sure that they know what we're looking at and know that their property tax bills will be used for this. But it should show the breakdown of the improvements on the structure and the land, and then all of the improvements would be abated, and then only the increase in real property would be abated. And that's just for phase one. That's for the first 10 years. And then for the next 15 years, there would be at least 50% abatement on the entire assessed value. So we would no longer be looking at the land and the improvement differences. We would be taking the assessed value together. And for both of these abatements, this is the statutory structure for it, but we can offer less. So you might be familiar with the term pilots or payment in lieu of taxes. We could offer only 50% abatement on the improvements and require somebody to pay that other 50% of their taxes still. So this is just the structure that the statute sets up, but it could be adjusted some. Does anybody have any questions on that?
Does the abatement transfer if you sell the property?
Does abatement transfer?
It can. The way that this would work is that the property owner would sign an abatement agreement with the corporation, and that essentially just requires the property owner to actually make the improvements, but also to maintain the improvements, not knock them down in the next 2 years or so. And then if part of that would also be that if you sell your property, the abatement can be transferred to that next owner, but they have to still maintain the improvements. We just want the improvements to stay. So actually, I will go back to the last slide. So the last portion of this first phase one says that the abatement is measured by the year before the corporation took title to the property. So this is the quirk of the 353 program, is that to be able to give tax abatement, the corporation has to actually take title to the property that has the tax abatement, and then the corporation gives the abatement to the property owner. The way we do this is that once the project is fully complete, once the improvements have been made and the board of directors says, yes, you are eligible to, you're going to receive tax abatement, the owner will deed the property to the corporation, and then the corporation will deed the property right back to the property owner within 24 hours. And none of those deeds will be recorded, but that's the process that we go through for this, because the corporation is the one who's actually given the abatement, and then the corporation gives it to the property owner through that transaction. And I know that's a little bit funky, and sometimes people get a little uncomfortable with that. I have been working with a 353 for the last 2 years, and we haven't had any problems with doing this. I've had one participant actually who's deeded the property over to us a few times, a little bit too early on accident, and they've had no issues with their mortgage lender or anything like that. So I know it's a little bit funky, but it's just the way that we do this, and I don't believe that anybody has really had any major issues come from this. Are there any questions on that process? Okay. Now, we talked about the redevelopment plan is the governing document of this program. The way the requirements for the redevelopment plan is first that we have to establish the boundaries of the district. I think we're looking at the historic district, but it could be any area in the city. It could be a much larger area. It could be a much smaller area. It really just depends on what the goals of the program are. And for that district, we do have to have a blight finding. This is a statutorily defined term, and essentially we have to find insanitary or unsafe conditions, deterioration of site improvements, or the existence of conditions which endanger life or property. And this is found generally through a blight study is done usually by a land use planner or an attorney, but we have to find that the area is blighted. And that does not mean that every single parcel in that area is blighted, just that the majority of the properties in that area are blighted. I work with a 353 that has a rather large area that covers most of the city. And occasionally we get somebody who says, my property is not blighted. Why am I in there? It's not every single parcel, but it's the area in general is blighted. The next portion that we do have to include is a cost benefit analysis. And this is usually an Excel sheet that shows the effect of the property of the abatement on each taxing jurisdiction, and the effect if there were no tax abatement on each taxing jurisdiction. So this is usually what the taxing jurisdictions really do want to see before the plan is approved. And that just shows them what they can expect from this program. And I should say, we don't expect, every single property in the area to participate. It's a couple here and there. And also this program could last over, 10 years. And while somebody may participate in year 1, it might take another property owner till year 3 or 4 to participate. So I don't expect every single property to be in this program in the first year, but that cost benefit analysis will show the taxing jurisdictions if we get a lot of people involved, if all of these properties are included in this program, what can we expect on our revenues? And then, like I said before, those base property tax values will continue to flow to taxing jurisdictions still. And then, like I said, for the redevelopment plan, one of the major things that we include in there are all of these special considerations. How much abatement is going to be offered? We don't have to offer everything that the statute allows. It could be less. There also could be different levels of abatement for different types of projects, or for, like my next point, differences for commercial properties versus residential properties. The abatement could be different for different classifications of property. There are also usually different levels of investment are required for different levels of abatement. Generally, you shouldn't get the full abatement if you put in the minimum required amount of investment. But if there are different levels of investment that we're looking at, we can offer different levels of abatement as well. Was there a question? Maybe? No, okay. Another one that we include a lot are what different kinds of improvements and uses are desired. Looking at different plans, some plans say that they will not allow any new builds on vacant land. Some plans are designed to try to address that infill need of vacant land. So it really just depends on what the city is looking for, what the council desires here, and then what kinds of improvements are realistic in the city. What are we really looking for here? There are also the ability to include program guidelines. So the board of directors will actually be administering this program, and they are the ones who will actually be doing the day-to-day work. And I shouldn't say day-to-day. It's not day-to-day work for the board of directors. It's usually about month-to-month work. But they are the ones who are typically hearing from property owners in the area, hey, I'd really like to take part in this program, but hey, I'd really like to be here, but something is stopping me from being able to take advantage of this program. And those program guidelines can help address that issue. For example, one of my projects that I've worked on, it requires a $10,000 investment. And we were hearing feedback that while they have two projects that are together $10,000, they can't do those in the same year. So we decided that it would be okay for them to split those two projects up into 2 years to be able to get more people in the program and more people taking advantage of this program. So that's something that could be missing from the redevelopment plan, but then allows the board of directors to have some flexibility in working with the plan throughout the years. And then finally, the most important thing is just to include the goals of the city. Like I said, the redevelopment plan is the governing document. So it's what the board of directors will look to know if a project is acceptable or not. I have a redevelopment plan for a 353 that I work on that I look at every single time we have a meeting. It is really truly what the board of directors will look at. So it's very important that all of the goals of the city are included in that document. And then finally, just the one statutory thing that we have is that before the plan is approved, we do have to have a public hearing on that. And that hearing notice has to go out to the taxing jurisdiction so that they are aware that the council will be considering this plan. And that does not have a statutory deadline, but the city has to adopt their own notice deadline for that. And it is typically between 10 and 20 days. So that will also, before this plan is approved, the taxing jurisdictions will get more notice of it as well. Okay. So the tax abatement program, like I said, is actually administered by the board of directors, usually with a little bit of help from city staff as well. It can be a 3-member board up to a 13-member board. And they generally meet monthly once the project is ready to go. They will review applications, but also do a lot of work in promoting the program and having informational meetings like this. We will sometimes give presentations to, just the local groups that meet, if that's a group at the VA or a group at Rotary Club. Whoever wants to be involved, we can give a presentation, and usually the board of directors are helping with that too. The Urban Redevelopment Corporation is a corporation that does have a little bit of administration. There are bylaws. We have to file annually with the Secretary of State, and then it's a board of directors, so new appointments come on and off throughout the years. So there is a little bit of just corporation administration there. But they are really the ones who are in charge of the program guidelines. The redevelopment plan is approved by the city council, so they are the only ones who are able to amend that redevelopment plan. but the program guidelines would be approved by the board of directors. So they have more flexibility in being able to amend those. I think I mentioned briefly the abatement agreement. This would be the agreement that the corporation enters into with the property owner, and it requires the improvements to be made in exchange for the property tax abatement, but also has a few things about maintenance and just making sure that they have everything that they will need for the board of directors to be able to approve their project. We also sometimes will have annual reports to the council or the city administrator, just kind of dependent on what the city wants. And then I think I've mentioned this too, but just ongoing analysis of the program and how it's working. Are there people involved? Is there a barrier to entry for somebody? Is there something that we just didn't think of as we were writing the redevelopment plan and now it's causing an issue for anybody? And that's really what is really beneficial to have a really involved board of directors, is that they're out talking to people about the plan and making sure people know about it, but also coming back to the board of directors and saying, hey, I've heard about this. I think this is a problem for this program. Any questions on the board of directors?
My question's not on the board of directors, but I'm just curious about this. Missouri has a statute that says that if, say, the city goes and abates some kind of nuisance condition on a property and then certifies that to the county, that becomes part of the county tax. Now, I'm wondering if the abatement would apply to that.
It would not. And I believe it becomes part of the property tax in that it goes on the tax bill, but it's separate from the actual ad valorem tax. So I don't believe that the tax abatement would abate any nuisance costs like that. Are there any questions just generally on the program? Next, I have just a few different program examples to talk about. So if there's anything generally about the program, I'm happy to answer those questions now. And people will still be required to follow city code. So if there are any nuisance issues, generally people have to get those cleaned up as part of the program. That's one thing that I'll talk about next too, but sometimes the city focuses on more transformational blight removal, but also cities can focus on just nuisance issues. And that's something that as the council decides where they want to go with this program, that can be further fleshed out as well too. Okay, so a few examples. So the Harrisonville Square Neighborhood Redevelopment Plan, this is the one that I was referring to, is actually a rather large area. This is, I think most, or maybe about half of the city. You can see the downtown square at the north part of this map. And that was really the goal of this program, was to address the properties on that square. Unfortunately, they were all owned by the same property owner for many years, and they were just not maintained and not used to their best ability. So the idea here was to be able to address some downtown historic area, just property issues. And so they focused on utilizing only that phase 1 of the program, only those first 10 years. And then they limited the ability to use the plan for vacant properties and did not want any new rental units. So those are two examples of things that the council could agree with and put in the plan, or could disagree with and go on a different way with. But those are three of the sort of special considerations they were looking at. They also have a difference in commercial properties and residential properties here. They require a much larger investment for commercial properties and provide that full 10 years of tax abatement. They also require, with commercial properties, a mix of interior and exterior properties. And that's something to think about too. If we're looking at blight, are we looking at complete reuse of properties? Are we looking at making sure that town in general is more beautiful, more beautification project? And whatever that answer is, we can write that into this program. for residential properties in this program, they require a much lower investment, but only provide 5 years of that tax abatement instead of half. And they do actually require half of the investment to be on exterior improvements. And that's just different goals of the program.
Have a question?
So the city and the board of directors will have control over what the usage of these properties would be? Like you said, they don't want any more rentals down there, so they would have that control
Not
over
necessarily.
what the usage of your property would be?
No, just whether, if you want to participate in the abatement program, we would approve applications for specific reasons. So if the idea was to not create new rental programs, you just couldn't participate in the abatement program. But if you wanted to still have a rental unit at that property, that would be okay. It does not take away from any city zoning laws or anything like that. It would just be additional requirements or different requirements to take advantage of the tax abatement.
So that we're clear too, Lindsay understands that we're trying to do loft apartments downtown. So all that would be written into the development agreement, that all that's fine, that's good. Mixed use would go on downtown. We want entertainment. We want all those kinds of things. So as we write this development agreement, we would hear from citizens and organizations, what do we want to do for downtown? And what is our goals? This town that she's referencing, Harrisonville, they have an overabundance of rental properties, and they were trying to abate some of that, trying to get rid of some of that.
And fully just an example of one program. These things can all be changed and modified.
I have a question.
Yep.
So the initial investment of $100,000 or $10,000, is there any stipulation around what type of funding or where that funding comes from? Is there stipulations around whether that could be grant money or any of that?
First, I just want to make sure this is an example, so that $100,000 investment could be changed for this program, but generally no. The way that we process applications is that you have to show, quotes or contracts for whatever service you're putting into your property and being able to prove that you actually paid those costs. So generally we see, like for example, in a recent application I reviewed, they had a quote for $20,000 worth of exterior painting. And as long as that amount reaches that investment level that's required, that's enough to say that that's what you anticipate you would have in your project. After the project is done, we would require you to submit invoices or receipts or cancel checks, something to show that you did actually pay for that work. And then you would also need to prove that you did do that work.
So if it's grant money from the federal or state, it's irrelevant.
It is for this Harrisonville program, that is, but generally no.
Well, because with it being designated blighted, this area should qualify for a community block grant, correct? Community development block grant. There you go.
And that's something we have to consider with the council too. This city also has a beautification program, so they give out, I think it's maybe $5,000 for beautification programs. And this city decided that it was okay if those applications kind of crossed over, but that's something we would need to discuss with the council whether that would be okay.
Basically, what you're saying is it's up to the council and the board to come up with the parameters. So it can be anything.
Right.
The redevelopment plan, yes.
Just so we're clear, like CDBG grants generally are used for infrastructure improvements. So even if we do this program downtown and we get a community block grant to do road improvements to Broadway, or we're going to put in water lines, all that would go through the city, has no impact on this whatsoever.
This program is really just focused on does your project qualify for tax abatement? And did you do that project? We're not waiving any city codes. You'd still have to go through that whole process. We're not, like Mickey said, we're not doing anything with the city's own infrastructure. It's just an additional opportunity to use to get that tax abatement.
And then I know, again, with this, with Harrisonville, that 100,000, I'm pretty sure came up from, there was already businesses in the square that had improved their property. So the city went to them and said, what's it cost to improve a building down here in this historical district? That's where they came up with this number of 100,000. It's about $100,000 cost. So all of that is put into play here. That's why you're hearing from people that have already developed property downtown. What does it cost? Whenever you're talking about redoing a building in downtown Monad, what are some of those costs? And that's when you build into your development plan. That's why it can be very flexible, this plan.
And that's really the overall message here, is that it's funny, I'm talking about an imaginary redevelopment plan because it is very flexible. It is really dependent on what the council desires, what the community is willing to do and transform this area. So anything that we're talking about now with these other example programs is just what they decided worked for them. If there are other things that we decide works for us, we can include in those. That's why I really like these projects, because it's what do you guys want? You just got to tell me and I'll put it into this plan. And so that's what why I really like showing these example projects, to give a couple different examples.
And
the next,
just so we're clear, it's not the city, it's really the property owners that are benefiting from this program. So the city's not going to come down and say, you need to do this. It's the property owners that say, you know what, we're going to invest in this property, and that's, we're giving you a tax abatement.
But it would also help the city obtain grants, because it is blighted.
Absolutely.
To address the flood issue.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So, and I know we're digressing here, but we're working with agencies to help us with the flooding downtown. CBDG grants we would like to do some improvements down there. This is just one tool in the toolbox that we can help the downtown area. Sorry, Lindsay, go on.
No. Anytime. This is very flexible as well. So this next project is the Blue Springs Main Center redevelopment plan. This is also a main strip of town. And for here, they really wanted to target development of vacant properties. Sometimes a redevelopment plan may say that we don't want any vacant properties involved, but this one was specifically to address some vacant properties. They included that it was not intended for single family homes in the area, but for commercial vacant properties. And here they also provided that this program for them was not intended for routine maintenance, but for transformational blight removal. We're not looking for, the little things that you should have been doing on your property this whole time, but real transformational blight removal. This one also utilizes a city plan, their master plan, to determine if the projects are desired. And that's something we could look at as well, utilizing other city plans if there are any there. This one requires a much higher level of investment for a larger incentive. This one requires at least $750,000 for their biggest incentive, but they have smaller incentives also that are available for people who have less expensive projects. This next bullet point is one that we have not talked about yet, but is also something that the city could consider, is that for the maximum incentive, the city could require the property owner to prove, but for the incentive, that project would not happen. You might be more familiar with this language with TIF developments. Essentially, it requires the property owner to prove that if this incentive was not given, this project would not happen. And that's something that the city could require for property owners, could require for no property owners. That's just something else that we could think about. And then additionally, like Mickey said, this is one toolkit. There is other tools available, including permit fee waivers and things like that could also be considered with the project. Just kind of depends on what's desired. This next one is the Old Town Belton redevelopment plan, which is again an older historic area of town. And they are looking at overlay and design guidelines needed to improvements at existing buildings. Apparently throughout the years, they had people making improvements to buildings that just were not up to code and were not really being maintained. So this one was really trying to address those existing improvements to existing buildings. And this one, like in connection with that, requires either 100% or 50% of those improvements to be made to the exterior, depending on the level of investment. So that's something that we could look at too, trying to make sure that while improvements are made inside, they're also made outside for the public to be able to see on a daily basis. This one also has a high investment requirement for $750,000 for their full incentive. But they also do, again, have smaller incentives that are available as well. This one also does require a but-for test for the maximum incentive. And this one provides an interesting way to look at the incentive with the abatement, what they're actually getting. They provide abatement either in the amount of the cost of the improvements or for a specific period of abatement, whichever happens first. So that's something we could look at too, more as a cost of improvements recovery tool than it is for ongoing tax abatement. But that's something that could be looked at too. All just options for people to consider and be thinking about as we think about this program. So that's all I have, unless there are other questions.
Any questions? Yes, Serena?
How long does it take from like here to there to get to a place where you think it would be functional?
Sure. So part of that really depends on the redevelopment plan and how well the council and community are able to work together to get to an agreement on that plan. It could take a year, it could take a little bit longer than that, but generally I would be thinking about probably about a year to the board of directors being put in place and being able to accept applications. And that timeline can be adjusted as we're moving. But what's helpful is that I have a lot of forms and template agreements and things like that. So we don't have to spend time creating items for the program. It's just crafting those items to what the program needs, what the council desires. But ideally, once the program is all set up, the property owner should be able to submit an application and start on it very quickly. For another project I work on, we received an application last week, and the board of directors meets next week to consider that project. And if they approve it at that meeting, we can start, the property owner can start on their project.
And my next question is, what are the specific entities that are going to miss out on this unrealized tax abatement fund? So what are the entities that stand to lose that for our specific area here?
The taxing jurisdictions?
Yes, so the tax abatement impacts whose budget is what I'm saying.
So that would be the library, the school district, and then the county. And then there are a few different state options. There's also the health department for the county, which is a separate tax usually. But those are primarily the entities that would be affected.
And I want to say we had a representative from the school district yesterday and one from the county. So they're very aware of what we're looking at here.
So my follow-up question to that would be, as these entities have a stake in this abatement because it's unrealized revenue for them, I see that there's always a connection to having them involved with the conversation about how this works. Do you see any conflicts of interest with people who serve on boards with some of these other entities also making decisions with the city or in this committee that you're putting together?
If, like, for example, if a county commissioner would serve on the board of directors, something like that.
Yes.
I prefer to have entities represented on these programs. So it's not really a conflict of interest. It's a representative from that entity. And then having, fewer or more board of directors allows us to incorporate more of those entities, but it's not a conflict of interest. They just serve different roles.
So it's a matter of making sure you've got a wide enough group of people so that it doesn't feel like the people making the decision are only the ones that are impacted. You know what I mean?
So that
Sure,
the
yeah.
the deck isn't stacked in a certain way based on the potential interests of people who are impacted by the abatement. That's what I'm getting at. The number,
Sure,
what
and-
kind of number are you looking at here?
Well, and keep in mind that the board of directors, the school district, the county commission, all function as a quorum of their group. So when they are on the board of directors, they would function as a quorum of that board of directors. They're not acting alone or approving anything by themselves. So that way is all interests are protected as well.
So what's the number you're thinking of for this specific plan?
We haven't said anything.
You haven't thought about
no.
that?
This is all very preliminary, and we just are trying to get the information out, and then we believe Main Street has some strategic plans we want to hear about. This is very, very early in the process.
Now, if the area is designated 353, is there any way to make it retroactive for any businesses who have already done that?
No. Yeah, no, sorry, Matt, no, yeah.
Unfortunate reality.
I actually asked that question yesterday to Lindsay, and she told me you cannot.
But you could always make new improvements as well that do qualify for the program.
Any other questions?
I have one.
There. Question you don't want to ask, in front of everybody, you can always send them to Mickey and we can get those answered too.
Yeah.
There have been some concerns about declaring blight in our downtown district. What are the pros and cons to making that determination? Could that impact property values or somebody's ability to get loans?
Not that I am aware of. This 353 program requires us to find blight. So to be able to do this program, we have to find it. I don't believe it has an effect on any property values. Generally, hopefully property values for this whole area will rise through this program. And that's really what we're trying to do here, right? Is create long-term investment in the city. And so ideally that helps do that process.
What is the percent of properties that need work does it have to be 50%, or does it have to be 75% of the properties have to be, need work in order to be considered blight?
So it's just the predominance of the area is blighted. There's not really a specific number, but just that the area as a whole is blighted. But like I said, that doesn't necessarily mean that your property is blighted. It also could mean that the streets and the curbs are blighted. We would not go into, each property and say, this is a blighted property, this is a blighted property. The area itself would be blighted.
So it's standard practice to do a blight study on any initiative. So even our TIF 3 up by the hospital, that had to have a blight study, and it proved to be blighted. So there's not a lot of buildings up there, and the nicest building is the hospital, but it did qualify for a TIF. It's just a tool that has to be done for these initiatives. All right, any other questions? All right, Lindsay, I don't see any, so thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And, yep. So I don't know if she needs to drop off. And then we have a handout for everybody that has all this information. It was prepared by Lawboro Municipal Law. You can read through it. Mike's got those, and he can hand those out to you. And as I said, this is really the starting point. I'm going to defer, Mr. Mayor, do you have